Joining us now, Democratic Congressman Jim McGovern of Massachusetts. He was part of the congressional delegation led by House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who met over the weekend with President Zelensky in Kyiv. Congressman, thanks so much for being with us. Just tell us and our viewers what you saw on the ground in Kyiv in terms of assessing the damage and what you heard in your conversations from President Zelensky.
Well, I was honored to be part of a delegation that Speaker Pelosi led, and we went to Kyiv, and we had a one-on-one meeting with President Zelensky, which lasted over 3 hours. And we heard about the terrible, horrific impact that this war is having on the Ukrainian people, the war crimes that Vladimir Putin is committing on a daily basis, everything from targeting maternity hospitals, they're uncovering mass graves, to we heard about from humanitarian workers and aid workers about young girls being raped in front of their mothers and families, some being put into human trafficking. So the situation is horrific, and the world needs to be there and stand with the Ukrainian people, and that was the message we delivered to President Zelensky.
And the American people have just stood in awe over the last couple of months, watching not just the Ukrainian president or the Ukrainian military, but Ukrainian civilians stand up and fight for their country. Tell us a little bit about what you saw in the Ukrainian people there on the ground.
This is an incredible people who do not want to give up their independence, their freedom. They certainly do not want to be under the rule of Vladimir Putin, and they are vastly outnumbered by the Russian military, not only in terms of the size of their army, but in terms of the weapons they have. And yet they have this incredible spirit, and they are pushing Russia back. They are winning, and it is important that we be there to help provide them the resources so they can continue to win. Look, remember one thing, Ukraine did not attack Russia. Russia has attacked Ukraine. The Ukrainian people have done nothing against Russia, and yet the Russian military, under the guidance of Vladimir Putin, are committing war crimes each and every day. And look, we all want this war to end. We want it to end now. The person who can end it is Vladimir Putin. He can call a halt to this right now, and that will be it. But he is not. And since he is not, and he is a bully, it is important that we stand up and we provide the weapons, the economic assistance, and the humanitarian assistance. You know, I reminded people at a press conference we did in Poland that this war that Putin has launched against Ukraine is not just against the people of Ukraine. It's a war against the world's most vulnerable and the world's poor, because he is blocking Ukraine's ability, which is Ukraine is the breadbasket of the world, to get wheat, sunflower oil, maize out to Africa, to the Middle East. So he's provoking a hunger crisis, a global hunger crisis on top of that. I mean, what kind of individual would do that? And I continue to believe there's a special place in hell for Vladimir Putin. I mean, what he is doing is horrific. I'm somebody who has fought for peace all my life. I have been against U.S. military interventions in so many places around the world. I've been against the U.S. arming tin horn dictators around the world. But here is a case where the Ukrainian people are being viciously attacked, and I think the world has an obligation to stand with them and provide them the assistance to be able to prevail and win in this battle.
Congressman McGovern, good morning. It's Jonathan Lemire. I wanted to zero in on President Zelensky and your conversations with him. Did he talk at all about the idea of a negotiated settlement to this war and what he would be willing to potentially bring to the table with the Russians, were Putin, as you say, indicate that he's willing to end the fighting? And then secondly, just give us a sense as to how he seemed. He has obviously it's been 2 months now. He's been in this bunker. He has attracted attention and praise from around the world. How is he holding up in your estimation?
Well, I think he's holding up remarkably well. I mean, it was an intense 3-hour meeting with Speaker Pelosi and our delegation and President Zelensky, and every minute was substantive, and he is hopeful. He believes in his people. He believes that this cause is the right cause, and that goodness will prevail over evil at the end. I was incredibly impressed at his composure and his focus and his mastery of every topic you can possibly imagine. So look, the Ukrainians have said over and over that they, at the beginning of this attack by Putin, that they would be willing to sit down and negotiate. What the terms of those negotiations would be, if they decide to do that, if the Russians decide to agree to that, that's up to the Ukrainian government, the Ukrainian people. But understand one thing: every time that the Ukrainians and the Russians have talked, the Russians have backed down or reneged on what they promised. So there is a trust issue here, and quite frankly, I don't think the Ukrainians trust the Russians. I certainly don't. I mean, Putin is a liar, he's a bully, and he's a war criminal. And he's now part of an exclusive club that includes Kim Jong-un. I mean, that's where he is right now, and he has crossed so many lines in terms of the atrocities that he's committed. The world needs to hold him to account.
Congressman McGovern, I want to ask your reaction to the major breaking news overnight, the leaked draft opinion published by Politico, that a majority of the Supreme Court is prepared to overturn the landmark Roe versus Wade decision. What is the reaction among Democratic lawmakers? What are the options? What are they saying?
Well, I'm hearing the news, late last night, as all of you were getting the news. Look, I think, let me just say for the record, right now, abortion is still safe and legal, and people need to know that. But if this draft is accurate, quite frankly, it's disgusting. It demonstrates how politicized the Supreme Court has become, how out of touch with America they are. I mean, over 73% of the American people, Democrats, Republicans, and independents, believe abortion should be safe and legal. And it shows their contempt for decades of precedent. I mean, this Supreme Court has this twisted, dystopian view of America. I think they want to turn this country into The Handmaid's Tale. I mean, they are so out of touch. I think it's a disgusting ruling, if that indeed it turns out to be accurate reporting. And look, people need to organize. Because these rights can be taken away. That's what this decision would do if, in fact, it turns out to be true.
Congressman Jim McGovern, not mincing words there. Thank you very much for coming on the show this morning.